And as promised, we've got an unbelievable guest this week. We've got Deborah Brown, town meeting member of Precinct 1 and president of the Brookline Improvement Coalition. Deborah, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Deborah, you've been a town meeting member for a while. You're more recently, I think, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong, active with the BIC. But we want you to go all the way back. Like, tell us what you've been up to since birth. Tell us a little bit of story about you. Tell us about you.
You know, the thing I think that most people find most interesting is that I was born in Roswell, New Mexico. And I like to say everybody's from somewhere. But basically,
I don't think there are many people there now, but back then I imagine there were very few people in Roswell, New Mexico.
I think there's always been very few people in Roswell. So lived in Roswell, basically grew up in Texas, went away to college in Nebraska, came back to Texas to the University of Texas Law School. And, you know, one of my first jobs out of law school was actually working for the Texas Department of Agriculture with good old Jim Hightower. And I was responsible for litigating violations of the state's pesticide laws. Now, this is in the late 80s, and the word farm worker in Texas wasn't necessarily held in the highest regard, but it certainly highlighted for me in a way that I hadn't seen before, how people can just be mistreated to such an extent that it actually impacts their health and well-being. And so it was an eye-opener for me and sort of put me on this track to do work that helps people.
And you've been very focused on that since I've known you in Brookline, public service. And so, you know, that's maybe part of the story, but there may be more. You know, why are you interested in public service? Where does that come from? What's the itch you're scratching? Sell it to us.
Well, you know, I think most people have some sort of public service that they're interested in. My form of public service is probably born out of being a woman of color, growing up in America, seeing disparities, and coming to Brookline and, you know, again, seeing how people are treated differently, and then asking the question, you know, what role do I have to play in this? And so ultimately it comes down to one of how responsible am I for the conditions and situations that I see around me? And what role am I willing to play in improving that situation? And so from that, you get to an activism of sorts. But, you know, I don't care whether you're working, you know, on a lawn program or a racial justice program. I think they're both important for the betterment of the community.
And so there's certainly a part of you that is an activist, but there's another part of you who is part of government, right? You're a town meeting member from Precinct 1. When did you first get elected to town meeting?
I got elected 3 years ago, I think. I'm a relative newbie.
But you've been active, and you've certainly climbed the learning curve quickly. And you're also active in the Brookline Improvement Coalition. Now, my viewers know a lot about town meeting. We talk about it, maybe not every week, but often. But they may not be familiar with the BIC. So tell folks what the Brookline Improvement Coalition is, and then maybe help us understand your role within the BIC.
Well, I am actually the president of the board for the Brookline Improvement Coalition. And the Brookline Improvement Coalition is Brookline's Community Development Corporation. Now, a community development corporation, you know, it's one of those programs that was formed in the, I think, late 60s, early 70s initially, that looked at the war on housing. And its purpose is to create affordable housing, And that's everything from, a shovel in the ground to helping people organize their finances such that they're in a position to either rent or even buy a property. Now, BIC is relatively small as compared to some of the larger community development corporations nationally or even locally. And we have a property on Beacon Street that has 16 units. They're single room units. And then we have another property on Boylston Street that has 6 units. And those are multifamily units. And the units on Boylston Street have 2 and 3 bedroom units for families. So, that's a quick picture of it. But we've got a dynamic board. We're always looking for new board members. And, this is a heady time to be involved, I think, in affordable housing. I think there are a lot of challenges in Brookline, but I also believe that there are a lot of opportunities.
Now, is BIC solely focused on maintaining and operating those 2 properties, or does BIC have bigger plans?
BIC has bigger plans, but I'll tell you, anybody in the affordable housing business will tell you that first and foremost, you need to make sure that the properties you have are in pristine condition and that their finances are solid. So those are, the things that as president, I'm focused on, just making sure that the books, are solid and that our properties are places that anyone would want to live in, So, and it doesn't matter that maybe you were homeless 3 months before this. I'll a 30-second vignette. One of our more recent tenants was a young woman with 3 small children. She was coming from out of state. And it was one of those deals where she was just moving. And when she got the call, I think she was actually in the bus station. She moves up here into the house. Property manager shows up. She and her 3 kids are sitting on the floor. Well, BIC's not in the business of identifying furniture for people, but that's something that we had to do, So we get people largely when they're in their toughest situation. And, that's our purpose. And clearly we want to build more housing, but, we want to make sure that what we have is solid for the people that live there now, as well as for the people that'll live there, 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
And certainly in Brookline local politics, there has been far more conversation about both subsidized affordable housing and market rate affordable housing in the last few years than perhaps the 10 or 20 years prior. And so, it's not unique to this moment in time, but there's something going on. And so what is it about housing? Obviously, there are all sorts of social needs, right? Education, healthcare, help with substance abuse, help with employment, right? Why is housing where it's at?
Well, I always go back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need food and you need shelter. And if you don't have safe, healthy housing, then I don't expect you to be able to get up and go to work. I would expect that the demons that dance around in someone's head become exacerbated. And children can't learn if the housing is not safe, if it's not pleasing. And so I think that's, people are beginning to connect those dots in ways that maybe they hadn't in the past. I know Harvard has done multiple studies on the role of suitable housing and learning. And so, it's like when we're arguing over we need more money for the school budget, or we need more money for something else. The reality is, if you're talking about children, first and foremost, we should be making sure that where they live is a place where they can thrive. And so when you ask me, why is housing percolating up to the top? I think it's because it's such a basic need. I think that as the price of housing has increased, especially in the Northeast, people have become more aware, not only of how they're getting priced out, but also how it creates its own sort of unique scarcity of sorts. And so just very quickly, those are what I think are some of the factors that are driving why people in Brookline are much more concerned about housing. Lastly, I'm going to add that I think that if you look at the Boston Foundation housing studies that have come out recently, they take a regional approach in a way that maybe 5 years ago we weren't. And so we're getting pulled into this, and the select board understands that. Mel Kluckner, the town administrator, understands that, and he serves on some of these committees. So I think there's a lot of things going on that have created this groundswell of interest, but largely it's the economy.
So let's bring it into Brookline a little bit. Brookline has a variety of different subsidized housing options. Folks generally agree there aren't enough of those options, right? But there's state housing, there's federal housing, there's Section 8, there's boarding houses. So tell us a little bit about what Brookline's doing well with respect to housing, and then perhaps some places where there's clear room for improvement.
Well, Brookline's doing well in really carving out housing opportunities for the elderly. Whether you're talking about the Colonel Floyd renovation that will be taking place shortly, or you're looking at the Center Street project or the Kent Street project. Those are three serious housing opportunities for the elderly in Brookline. 8% of which of the senior citizens in Brookline, I didn't realize this until the past year or so, live in poverty. So, and that's a real number. So if you ask me what we're doing well, we're really trying to address situation for senior citizens, and even the Brookline Housing Authority, in terms of its overall inventory, has been about the business of undertaking some major renovations. And part of that is with sometimes a little seed money from the town, but generally it's because they've been fairly sophisticated in figuring out how to access state and federal dollars, typically in the form of tax credits. But the senior housing, probably over the next 5 or so years, I think we're going to see something that's, honestly, maybe it'll make other communities sit up and go, oh, we can do this for our elderly. We can have the subsidized housing. We can have the low income housing where there's no market rate. And that's the role that Brookline Housing Authority plays. I think the areas for improvement, maybe, we need to do more education around Section 8. I think for the longest time, people heard the phrase Section 8, and they thought, oh my goodness, there's no way I'm going to have a Section 8 tenant. It doesn't pay well. I don't know who these people are, et cetera, et cetera. And nothing could be further from the truth. Here's the deal with Section 8. HUD, through Brookline Housing Authority, the Section 8 program, is going to pay you basically what the market rate is for that housing. And we can thank people like Raul Fernandez for getting that change into Brookline, because he asked the question, why is it so hard to get Section 8? He talked to a few tenants and to a few landlords, and the landlords were like, I can't take, $1,500 if what the market is asking for is $2,800. Well, guess what? Now you can get market rate. And I think that's going to be a huge benefit in terms of creating housing opportunities. Now, the other piece is that there's just not a lot of housing. I mean, we need more housing in Brookline if we're going to accommodate, the folks that want to live here. Uh, Likely it'll be multifamily dwellings. I'm a person who's a believer in mixed income housing. That's a little harder to do if you're trying to get some of the financing situated as easily. But I think on the family front, there are a lot more opportunities for housing. I think as a community development corporation, we need to be a little bit more aggressive in trying to partner with other organizations to promote family developments, family affordable housing developments. So
we talked a lot about housing, but I know you've got a variety of priorities. So why don't you share with our viewers some of the other things you've been thinking about and working on and, trying to stir up some good trouble about?
well, housing is a big one. But I mentioned something about food. There are a lot of people in Brookline who are not just housing insecure, but food insecure. And if you drive by St. Paul, or if you drive by the Egmont, BHA's Egmont property, and this just wasn't COVID. I mean, COVID sort of brought it to people's attention. It's sort of like all of a sudden you could see it, but there are long lines of people in need of food. So there are people in Brookline who are hungry. And a lot of these people work. A lot of them are elderly. And so I would like to see like the Brookline Food Pantry fully funded. I would love to see the town figure out how to create community farms so that people that want to grow their own produce in the summer and early fall have an opportunity to do that. So food insecurity is a big concern of mine. I have an interest in trying to figure out how do we help young people between those ages of 16 and 25, when they're most likely to get into trouble. Because there is really no safety net. There's no opportunity for those kids. If they didn't get if they didn't develop sort of a passion for learning or have the financial means to sort of exploit that passion, then they could end up on the wrong side of a whole lot of things, and not just the criminal justice system. But I consider boredom to be a terrible situation to be in. And so,
and certainly the Brookline Teen Center is active with people who are young of a particular age, certainly, but they're underfunded, right? They're understaffed. They're doing as much as they can with what they got. And, boredom doesn't start at 13.
No, boredom starts when we can't fully fund steps to success at pre-K and introduce young children consistently to, books and a passion for learning and curiosity. It begins at an early age when you realize walking through BHA properties that you have these teenagers who are actually babysitting their younger siblings because there's no one, the parents are working. And so those are the kids that end up missing out. And it's not just BHA. I mean, it could be anybody whose family does not have the means or the opportunity to provide, the child care, the daycare, or to send them off to the teenager, for that matter, off to a camp to explore what their passion is. I mean, I typically will ask a young person, what's your passion? And the standard answer for a lot of kids is basketball. And I'm like, all right, well, what else you want to do? Oh, I love basketball. I said, well, do you want to be a trainer if you hurt your knee? How about, the attorney for the basketball pro? or do you want to be an agent? And they'll be like, I hadn't really thought about that. And it's like, those are careers that will sustain you. Basketball, what are you going to play for 2-3 years, best case scenario? But people don't, they don't have those conversations generally. And, those are missed opportunities. But I was talking about that the teen center stops at the age of 18. What happens to those young people between 18 and 25? Those are the kids that get lost. Those are the kids that can end up in systems because we don't have a safety net for them. So that's an issue that I have. I have a real issue about making sure of late that the federal funds that are coming into Brookline, that we're really trying to figure out ways to make sure that people who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID are in some way taken care of. They're never going to be fully compensated, but at least, a good faith attempt to sort of look at the issues that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Another passion I have, and this will be my last one, the elimination of childhood lead poisoning. If I could say that I played a role in anything, I would be over the moon, because that is a problem. That is the most solvable public health problem that we have.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's just a pure money problem. We know what the problem is. Pipes have lead in them. We know how to fix it, replace them with pipes that don't have lead in them. And the only thing that stops us from doing it is money, is a decision that we're going to spend the money we have on that instead of on something else, right? MWRA, the source of our water, does a really nice job in measuring and keeping track, but we know there are lead pipes in Brookline. Of course there are, right? The age of our community essentially guarantees it. And, you talked about the ARPA money. There are a pretty substantial and not yet necessarily finalized list of constraints on how a state or a local government can spend that money. And so there are a lot of great ideas that actually are inconsistent with that. And I think Brookline will have to work hard and engage with the community to figure out what are things that will sort of build sustainable wealth, sustainable programs and services for our community that will benefit the people who so desperately need them, and in ways that are consistent with the federal government's guidance on how to spend that money. And it's going to be tricky. One of the key factors in much of it is that it has to also stimulate employment. And so, if you can give people money to dig a ditch and you're stimulating employment while they're digging. But Brookline isn't a community with a lot of employment inside of the town. And so finding ways to connect it with employment may be a challenge. But it's one challenge of many. And I have no doubt, Deborah, that you will be at the podium, at the table, on the Zoom, making sure that the town is thinking about things the right way.
Well, and the town is. I was at a select board meeting last night, and I had worked on a policy paper about how to create some robust community engagement so that we get, meaningful involvement from all strata of the community to hear about a myriad of ideas. And I feel like our elected officials and our senior policy people in town, Melissa Goff, Mel Kleckner, they get it. And they don't want to just do the minimum. I'm hearing them say that they want to create a process that actually figures out, what are our unmet needs? How can we actually create something in this town that we would not otherwise be able to do but for this money? This is a once in a lifetime pot of money coming in, and what can we do that we would not otherwise be able to do? And I hear people talking that way, and it's exciting. You know, when you look the Brookline Community Foundation, they're engaged in this, and I'm sure they're going to play a role. But the idea is, you know, is to find that passion, to find the issues, meld the two, and come up with some meaningful outcomes that actually demonstrate that this town improved the lives of people who had been adversely impacted by COVID.
Heady stuff. Deborah, thank you for coming on Brookline Interactive Group's channel today. Lovely to see you. I look forward to getting a cup of coffee or an adult beverage with you one of these days. But in the meantime, we have this moment that we shared together. So Deborah, thanks for coming on the show. And to the viewers, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.